For 9 months, I played the perfect husband to my pregnant wife, prepared the nursery, chose baby names. But I'd actually learned the baby wasn't mine at 6 months. Every night, lying beside her, every morning making her breakfast, all I could think about was the look on her face on delivery day. And when that moment came, nobody expected what happened next. For 9 months, I played the perfect husband to my pregnant wife, prepared the nursery, chose baby names. But I'd actually learned the baby wasn't mine at 6 months. Every night, lying beside her, every morning making her breakfast, all I could think about was the look on her face on delivery day. And when that moment came, nobody expected what happened next. My name is Thomas Richardson, 34 years old, senior architect at Harrison and Associates in Manchester. I met Sarah at a charity gala 3 years ago. She was radiant in her emerald dress, working as an event coordinator for the Cancer Research Foundation. We married 18 months later in a beautiful ceremony at St. Mary's Cathedral with 200 guests celebrating what everyone believed was a perfect love story. Sarah got pregnant last January. I was over the moon. We'd been trying for 8 months, and when she showed me that positive test, I actually cried tears of joy. I immediately started planning the nursery, researching the best schools in our area, even bought books about fatherhood. I was determined to be the dad I never had, the kind of father who would never miss a school play or football match. The first 5 months were blissful. Sarah glowed with that pregnancy radiance everyone talks about. I attended every doctor's appointment, held her hand during morning sickness, assembled the crib we picked out together. We painted the nursery pale yellow, since we wanted to be surprised about the gender. I suggested the name Emma for a girl, Oliver for a boy. Sarah loved both choices, or at least pretended to. But then came that Tuesday in June that changed everything. Sarah had gone to her routine checkup alone because I had an important client presentation. She came home quieter than usual, avoiding eye contact and barely touching her dinner. When I asked about the appointment, she said everything was fine, just tired. That night, she seemed distant, checking her phone constantly and going to bed early. The next morning, I found a medical document that had fallen from her purse. It was a genetic screening report from a private clinic called Blackstone Medical Centre. What caught my attention wasn't just the unfamiliar clinic name, but the date. The test had been done 2 weeks earlier, and there was a handwritten note about paternity verification. My blood went cold as I read those words. I confronted Sarah that evening after dinner. At first, she denied everything, claimed it was just routine testing. But when I pressed harder, when I told her I'd seen the paternity notation, something in her face cracked. She broke down crying, but not the tears of someone who felt guilty. These were tears of someone who'd been caught. The truth came out in broken sentences between her sobs. There had been someone else. Richard Blackwood, her former colleague from the foundation. It had been going on for months before she got pregnant, and even she wasn't entirely sure who the father was. The genetic screening was supposed to give her answers, but instead, it gave her nightmares. I sat there in our living room, surrounded by baby clothes we'd bought together, listening to my wife confess that our entire future might be built on a lie. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing that she'd been planning to let me raise another man's child without ever telling me the truth. That night, after Sarah cried herself to sleep, I sat in the nursery we'd painted together and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her immediately. I wasn't going to file for divorce right away. I was going to wait, plan, and make sure that when the truth finally came out, it would be on my terms, not hers. The game had begun. The next 3 months were the most challenging acting performance of my life. Every morning I woke up next to Sarah, kissed her growing belly, and pretended I was excited about our future together. But behind my smile, I was methodically planning for the day when everything would unravel. My first move was gathering evidence. I couldn't just rely on Sarah's confession or that medical document. I needed concrete proof that would hold up in court. I hired a private investigator named James Morrison, a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial cases. I told him everything, and he assured me we could build an airtight case. James began surveillance on Richard Blackwood immediately. Within 2 weeks, he had photographs of Richard entering Sarah's yoga studio, the same one she claimed she was attending for prenatal classes. The timestamps showed they were meeting twice a week, always when I was at work. The photos were damning evidence. I also started documenting everything in our household. I installed a small recording device in our living room, hidden inside a picture frame Sarah had given me for our anniversary. Every conversation we had about the baby, every time she lied about her whereabouts, every hushed phone call was being recorded. Meanwhile, I had to maintain the facade of an excited, expectant father. I attended prenatal classes with Sarah, assembled the changing table, hung pictures in the nursery, and even threw a baby shower for her friends. The whole time I was calculating how much money I was spending on a child that wasn't mine. The hardest part was the intimacy. Sarah would place my hand on her belly to feel the baby kick, her eyes sparkling with what I now knew was manufactured emotion. I had to pretend to be moved, to act like I felt that paternal bond forming, when really I felt nothing but cold calculation. I consulted with family law attorneys during my lunch breaks. Eleanor Hartwell became my primary counsel. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who had handled high-profile divorce cases. When I explained my situation, she immediately understood the legal complexities we would face. The paternity issue was crucial, Eleanor explained. Even if the baby wasn't biologically mine, I could still be held legally responsible if my name went on the birth certificate. We needed to prevent that from happening, but timing was everything. If I acted too early, Sarah might flee. If I waited too long, I might be trapped. Eleanor suggested we prepare divorce papers in advance, along with a motion to compel paternity testing. We would also file for temporary restraining orders to freeze our joint assets. Everything would be ready to file the moment the baby was born. I also had to consider the financial implications. Sarah and I had joint savings accounts totaling nearly £70,000. We owned our house together, though I had contributed 80% of the deposit from my inheritance. I started quietly transferring money into a separate account. The psychological toll was enormous. I was living with someone who had betrayed me fundamentally, pretending to love her while planning her destruction. Some nights I lay awake wondering if I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. But then I would remember that Sarah had made her choices. By the 8th month, Sarah's behavior became increasingly erratic. She was nervous, jumpy, constantly checking her phone. I think part of her suspected that I knew more than I was letting on. Richard had apparently been pressuring her to leave me, but she was trapped by the comfortable life I provided. As we approached the due date, I made my final preparations. I arranged to take 2 weeks off work, ostensibly to bond with the new baby. The night before Sarah went into labour, she seemed almost panicked, asking strange questions about our future. I assured her everything would be fine. It was the last lie I would tell her. Sarah went into labour on a rainy Thursday morning in September. I was in my home office when I heard her call my name from upstairs. When I found her in our bedroom, clutching her belly and breathing heavily, I knew this was it. The contractions were coming every 5 minutes. I helped her into the car, grabbed the hospital bag, and drove through Manchester streets towards St. Mary's Hospital. Sarah squeezed my hand during each contraction, trusting me completely. If only she knew what I had planned. At the hospital, everything moved quickly. The nurses wheeled Sarah into the delivery ward while I handled paperwork. As I filled out forms, I noticed the section about the father's name on the birth certificate. I left it blank. When the nurse asked, I said we would complete it after delivery. While Sarah was being prepared, I stepped outside to make 3 crucial phone calls. First, I called Eleanor Hartwell and gave her our code phrase. The package has arrived. She confirmed all legal documents were ready. Second, I called James Morrison and told him to be on standby. Third, I called my brother William to come as a witness. Back in the delivery room, Sarah was progressing well. The midwife, Margaret, kept encouraging her through each contraction. Sarah asked me to hold her hand and tell her everything would be all right. I did, knowing it was probably the last time I would ever comfort her. As the hours passed, I found myself studying Sarah's face. Even in pain, she was beautiful. I remembered why I had fallen in love with her 3 years ago. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who could lie to my face for months while carrying another man's child. Around 4 in the afternoon, the doctor announced that the baby was crowning. Sarah pushed with everything she had, and I held her hand, playing my part perfectly. When the baby finally emerged, a healthy little girl with dark hair, the room filled with joy and celebration. Everyone was smiling except me. The baby was beautiful, but as I looked at her tiny features, I could see traces of Richard Blackwood. The nose was definitely not mine, and the eye shape was unmistakably his. Sarah was crying tears of joy, asking if I wanted to hold my daughter. I declined, saying I needed a moment. The midwife began standard procedures, weighing the baby and checking vital signs. She asked Sarah what name we'd chosen. Sarah looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to say Emma, as we'd discussed. Instead, I said nothing. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Sarah whispered the name herself. It was then that I made my move. I walked to my jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. Sarah watched me with growing concern as I approached her bedside. The midwife and doctor were busy with the baby, not paying attention to our conversation. Sarah, I said quietly, before we sign any birth certificates, I think you need to see this. I handed her the envelope containing the deoxyribonucleic acid test results that James had arranged through his contacts at a private laboratory. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. I watched her face change as she read the contents. The colour drained from her cheeks. The test results were clear. Based on genetic material obtained from her personal items and Richard's workplace, there was a 99.7% probability that Richard Blackwood was the biological father. How did you... She started to ask, but her voice failed her. The midwife noticed Sarah's distress and asked if everything was all right. I assured her that Sarah was just overwhelmed with emotion. I've known for 3 months, I told her quietly. I've had time to process this, to plan, and to decide what comes next. You're just beginning to understand the consequences of your choices. Sarah began to cry. But these weren't tears of joy. These were tears of fear, and the crushing realization that her carefully constructed lie was collapsing completely. The delivery room fell into uncomfortable silence as Sarah stared at the deoxyribonucleic acid test results in her trembling hands. The baby's cries filled the air, but all I could focus on was watching my wife's world crumble. This was the moment I had been planning for 3 months. "Thomas, please," Sarah whispered, barely audible. "We can work this out. I made a mistake, but I love you." The desperation in her voice was palpable, but I felt nothing except cold satisfaction. She was finally experiencing the helplessness I had felt when I discovered her betrayal. The midwife, Margaret, noticed the tension and asked if we needed privacy. I told her that wouldn't be necessary because we had nothing left to discuss privately. Sarah's face went white as she realized I was about to make our business public. I pulled out my phone and called Eleanor Hartwell. "Eleanor, it's Thomas. Please proceed with filing all the documents we prepared." "Yes, immediately." I ended the call and looked at Sarah, who was now crying uncontrollably. The baby had been cleaned and wrapped, but neither of us moved to hold her. "What documents?" Sarah asked frantically. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick folder containing copies of all the legal papers Eleanor had prepared. Divorce petition, motion for paternity testing, temporary restraining orders, and asset protection measures. "I'm protecting myself from a woman who has been lying to me for months," I said calmly. "These are divorce papers, Sarah. I'm requesting immediate paternity testing through the court system, and I've frozen all our joint accounts." The doctor looked up with obvious discomfort. This was clearly not how most deliveries concluded. Sarah began hyperventilating, and Margaret had to administer oxygen. I felt no sympathy whatsoever. My brother William arrived at that moment, just as I had planned. I had asked him to come as a witness. He took one look at the scene and immediately understood this wasn't a celebration, but a confrontation. "William," I said, "I need you to witness Sarah acknowledging that she has committed adultery, and that the biological father of this child is Richard Blackwood, not me." Sarah's sobs became louder as she realized even my family was now involved. "I won't sign anything," she managed to say between gasps. I smiled for the first time since entering the hospital. This was exactly the response I had anticipated. "Actually, you don't need to sign anything," I told her. "The deoxyribonucleic acid evidence speaks for itself. Eleanor has already filed emergency motions with the family court. A judge will review everything tomorrow morning." I turned to the doctor. "Doctor, I want it clearly noted in all medical records that I am not claiming paternity of this child. The biological father is Richard Blackwood, and genetic testing has confirmed this fact." The doctor nodded reluctantly and made notes in his chart. This was unusual, but everything I was requesting was legally within my rights. The birth certificate would remain incomplete until paternity was officially established. Sarah made one final desperate attempt. "The baby needs a father, Thomas. Even if she's not biologically yours, you could still love her." Her words might have moved me 3 months ago, but I had spent too much time planning this moment. "The baby does need a father," I agreed. "Her biological father, Richard Blackwood. I suggest you call him immediately." I handed her my phone with Richard's number already dialed. "Tell him he's about to become a daddy." Sarah stared at the phone like it was poisonous. She knew that calling Richard would make everything irreversibly real. Once he knew about the baby, there would be no going back. "I can't," she whispered. "He doesn't want children. He told me he never wanted to be a father." The irony was perfect. She had destroyed our marriage for a man who didn't even want the child she was carrying. "Then you have a problem," I said simply, "because I'm not raising another man's child, and apparently neither is he." I gathered my papers and prepared to leave the hospital, leaving Sarah alone with the consequences of her actions. 6 months later, I sat in my new apartment overlooking Manchester city centre, reviewing the final divorce decree that had arrived that morning. The legal proceedings had moved faster than Eleanor had anticipated. Sarah's case had collapsed when Richard Blackwood refused to acknowledge paternity and fled to Ireland. The irony was beautiful. Sarah had destroyed our marriage for a man who abandoned her the moment she needed him most. When she called Richard from the hospital that day, he hung up immediately. James Morrison's surveillance confirmed that Richard had left Manchester within 48 hours. Sarah had tried desperately to contact me during the divorce proceedings. She sent letters, showed up at my office, even had her mother call me begging for reconciliation. Each attempt only strengthened my resolve. The woman who had spent months lying to my face was now experiencing the consequences. The financial settlement had been straightforward. Since Sarah had committed adultery and attempted to deceive me about paternity, she received nothing from our joint assets. The house, our savings accounts, even her car. Everything remained mine. Eleanor had done exceptional work protecting my interests. The most satisfying moment came when Sarah was forced to move back in with her parents. The same parents who had bragged about their successful daughter's marriage were now dealing with their unmarried daughter and her illegitimate child. The social embarrassment was exactly what Sarah deserved. I had received updates about Sarah's situation through mutual acquaintances. She was working part-time at a local shop, struggling to make ends meet while caring for a baby whose father wanted nothing to do with them. The comfortable life she had enjoyed as my wife was gone forever. During the divorce proceedings, Sarah had made one final desperate attempt to salvage something from our relationship. She offered to give up custody of the child, to pretend the whole affair had never happened, anything to get me back. Her lawyer had advised against such measures. I declined her offer without hesitation. Trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Even if she had given up the child, I would never be able to look at her without remembering her betrayal. Some wounds cut too deep to heal. My life had improved dramatically since removing Sarah from it. I received a promotion at Harrison and Associates, partly because I was able to focus completely on my work without the distraction of a failing marriage. My colleagues noticed the change in my demeanour. I had also started dating again, though I was much more cautious about trust now. The experience with Sarah had taught me valuable lessons about recognizing deception and protecting myself emotionally and financially. Any future relationship would be built on complete transparency. The baby, whom Sarah had named Emma, as we had originally planned, was growing up without ever knowing that I had once been prepared to be her father. This was probably for the best. Children deserve honesty from the beginning. Sometimes I wondered if Sarah truly understood the magnitude of what she had lost. Not just the financial security, but the chance to build something real and lasting. She had chosen temporary excitement over permanent commitment. Looking back, I realized that discovering Sarah's betrayal had been a blessing in disguise. Better to learn someone's true character before wasting decades of my life with them. I had avoided the trap that ensnares so many men, raising another man's child while being deceived. The genetic testing had been crucial to my legal victory. Without that scientific evidence, Sarah might have successfully manipulated the situation to her advantage. Modern technology had given me the tools to protect myself. As I finished reading the divorce decree, I felt a sense of closure that had been months in the making. The woman who had tried to deceive me was now facing the consequences of her choices, while I was free to build a new life based on honesty and genuine trust. Justice had been served.